So the next characteristic that we were going to talk about is that living things use energy, and you're eventually going to get a vocabulary assignment where you have to define several terms related to the characteristics of living things. And so what I'm going to do on this page is I'm going to highlight the vocabulary that you'll have to know and be responsible for, that if you take good notes today, then you won't have to look those words up and you could just use your notes. So plants are called autotrophs because they can make their own food through the process of photosynthesis. Okay? And I kind of want to break these words down for you so that the term autotroph, auto means self. And I think we talked about this before. So if you're writing an autobiography, you're writing a story about yourself. Auto means self, and troph means nutrition. So this word means self-nutrition. So this is referring to organisms that can do photosynthesis or similar processes, and they can use materials like carbon dioxide and water, and with the help of the sun's energy, turn that into usable food energy. So these are organisms that can make their own food. So these would include plants and some protists like algae, and some bacteria are autotrophs as well. And then we'll just kind of break down the term photosynthesis. This is another vocabulary term. So the prefix photo means light, and synthesis means to put together. When you're synthesizing something, you're putting it together. So the term photosynthesis means to put together with light. So we're putting together carbon dioxide and water in the presence of light and using that to make organic molecules, or molecules that contain carbon, specifically sugar. So this process takes solar energy, the sun's energy, and uses it to produce chemical energy, where energy is stored in the bonds of a molecule, so that when the bonds are formed or bonds are broken, energy can be released. And the chemical energy that's formed during photosynthesis is sugar. So the sun's solar energy is used to make chemical energy. Okay, so I do want you to be familiar with the formula for photosynthesis, so make sure that you know this. And like I said before, we'll get into the details of each of these characteristics of living things, like living things reproduce, living things are made of cells, they use energy. So we'll get into more detail with little mini units after we go over this big kind of overview of the topic. But the formula for photosynthesis is the sun's energy is used to break apart the bonds that hold together carbon dioxide and break apart the bonds that hold together water molecules. And then the materials that go into forming carbon dioxide and water, specifically carbon atoms, oxygen atoms, and hydrogen atoms, are rearranged to form a new type of molecule, C6H12O6, which is basically sugar. Okay, and so this is the basis for our food chain. Then animals eat plants that have stored energy that brought food into the food chain by way of photosynthesis, and so on. So sugar is the basis of our food chain, the sugar that's made by plants, and then the plants during this process also release oxygen into the air. So plants are really good for us in the sense that they're building the foundation of our food chain, which is sugar, and they're releasing oxygen, which we need to breathe and break down the sugar. So animals, on the other hand, are not called autotrophs because they can't make their own food. They're called heterotrophs. Okay, so just like before, the term troph means nutrition. Okay, and the term hetero means different. So it's a different source of nutrition. Instead of being self-nutrition, the organisms have to eat other organisms in order to get energy. So this would be like animals. and fungus, and most bacteria, and most protists. So these are organisms that cannot make their own food. They have to eat. So animals are called heterotrophs because they cannot make their own food. They have to eat. They do a process that we call cellular respiration, where they turn the chemical energy that plants make, specifically in the form of sugars, into usable energy that the organism can use to do work. So respiration takes chemical energy in the form of sugar that plants make and turns it into usable energy. Plants do this process as well after doing photosynthesis. So plants will do photosynthesis to make the sugar, and then plants will do respiration to break the sugar down and turn it into usable energy. Animals only do respiration. So the beautiful thing about the formula for respiration is it's just the opposite of the formula for photosynthesis. So remember that on the left of a chemical equation, everything we put in, we call the reactants. And on the right of a chemical equation, everything that comes out is called the products, okay? The beautiful thing about cell respiration is the products of photosynthesis become the reactants of cell respiration. So if you memorize photosynthesis, all you have to do for respiration is to flip it so that the reactants for photosynthesis become the products for respiration, with one little minor exception, and I'll explain that in a second. So the basis of our food chain are plants. So plants provide us with sugars, C6H12O6, and you might hear these sugars called carbohydrates. And you might also hear a specific sugar that's formed by plants, glucose. Okay, that's the type of sugar that's C6H12O6. So whenever we're eating any type of plant or plant product, like a vegetable, a fruit, a cereal, or a bread, we're getting the sugars from plants, and that's our main source of energy. So protein is not our main source of energy. We eat protein for growth and repair. Fat is a backup store of energy, and our main source of energy is the sugars that plants make, our carbohydrates. So in cell respiration, when we eat plant material and we digest it, these sugars go to our cells. And when we breathe, the oxygen from our lungs is transported by red blood cells to all the cells in the body. And the oxygen is used to burn or break down sugars within our cells. And when the sugars are broken down, energy is released. So we'll put released to do work. So whatever work our cells need to do, that's fueled by the sugars that we eat, okay? And specifically, the sugars are turned into little packets of energy called ATP. These are little molecules. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. And then, like I told you before, the reactants for photosynthesis become the products for cell respiration. So not only do we turn the sugars into usable energy, but also we produce carbon dioxide as a waste product that goes into our blood, and then we exhale it via our lungs. And then we produce some water by breaking down the sugars that stays in and around our cells. Now, just a quick overview of the differences here. Remember that if we know photosynthesis, we can flip it to get respiration. The only difference is that with photosynthesis, we have sunlight energy, okay? And in respiration, we have ATP energy. Both forms of energy, okay? This is light and heat energy. This is chemical energy in the form of a molecule. Now, you might want to know why we take the chemical energy in sugars and turn it into more chemical energy in the form of a molecule called ATP. And the best explanation I can give you is that sugars are a giant store of energy. held between these bonds that hold the atoms together is a vast amount of energy that if it were released all at once, we would become overheated. So what we do is we take this giant sugar molecule and we turn it into these tiny little, I think it's like somewhere between 34 and 36 tiny little ATP molecules that we can then break down for energy when we need them. And the best analogy I can give you is that a sugar molecule that we take in from eating plants is like a $20 bill to a pop machine. It's way too much currency. The pop machine doesn't understand it. It's too much money. And so the ATP would be little packets of chemical energy, tiny little molecules. Each sugar is converted to somewhere between 34 and 36 ATP molecules. So the ATP molecules are like your quarters to your pop machine. It's a much smaller currency. Okay, so get familiar with this page. And this is pretty much all we're going to do for today. And so what I'd like you to do is just to use any extra time that you may have to finish up that homework assignment. And does anybody have any questions for me?